Right, good evening, everybody. It's the appointed hour of 6 o'clock. So, welcome to this meeting of the Derbyshire Dales District Council Planning Committee held on Tuesday, the 16th of January 2024. Welcome to guests this evening. Come to speak to our two planning applications, and a welcome to all those who are listening or watching at home or elsewhere. Before we start, the usual housekeeping. For those who are new to these meetings, we have toilets just outside the door at the back of the hall here, toilets on the left, and also toilets down the stairs on the left. And there is water and tea and coffee available outside the lobby as well, if you would like to partake. We've no planned fire or emergency practice for this evening, so if you do hear the alarm go off, please make your way through the emergency exit again to the rear of the hall and down the stairs and outside into the external area. Right, before we start consideration of the planning applications on the agenda, we've got a normal business to go through at the beginning. First of all, apologies for absence. But I'm going to interrupt myself before we do that, just because I forgot to introduce those sitting on the table here. On my right, we've got our Vice Chair, Councillor Sue Burfoot. We've got Chris, who is our Head of Development Management. Sarah, his colleague, sitting next to him. We've got Kerry on my left here, who's our legal advisor. We've got Helen to her left, who is our Senior Democratic Services Officer. And we've got our colleagues to the rear here, Angela and Tommy, who, from our committee section, who are here to make sure the meeting functions smoothly and effectively. Right, going back to the agenda. Item 1 is apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We've got apologies from Councillor Hughes, substitute Councillor Shelley and Councillor Whitehead.
Right, item 2, we have to approve the minutes of our meeting, which was held on the 12th of December 2023, which are in your agenda pack here. There is one very minor amendment to make on page 10 of your agenda. For those eagle-eyed people, the application 01339 was not resolved unanimously. You'll noted that one person voted against it and 3 abstained, so it was resolved rather than unanimously. Other than that, would someone like to move acceptance, approval of the minutes?
Move them, Chair.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Peter. So that's moved by Councillor Burton, seconded by Councillor Dobbs. All those in favour, please show. Thanks. That's carried almost unanimously. Sorry, any abstentions? Yeah, 1 abstention. 2 abstentions. Anyone against? No. So that was approved. Thank you very much for that. We now move on to expressions of interest. Would anyone like to declare an interest in any of the items on the agenda? No, that's good. Thanks for that. Right, we now move on to the first of our 2 applications for determination this evening. The first of which is the retrospective application for engineering works to facilitate car parking, a carport and a boundary fence at 5 Hackney Road in Hackney. We have some late comments on this, which I'd ask you to read, and then we will hear from 2 speakers. Just a couple of minutes to read through the comments we've received. Okay, we've got two speakers on this application. The first is Emma Hickling. If you'd like to come up and turn the microphone off. Emma is going to speak against the application. And Emma, you have 3 minutes, please.
Okay. This is a retrospective application as the development of the car park started in April last year without planning permission. We have consistently objected on the basis that the car park is structurally unsound and will collapse into our garden at some point and endanger our family and friends, including grandchildren. This car park is on a steep slope with a gabion wall used as a retaining wall to hold the infill rock. Our garden and home are directly below. To ensure that a gabion wall is safe and stable, the design must include the following: the soil type, slope stability, groundwater levels, drainage patterns of the ground that the gabions are sited on, an assessment of the anticipated load that the gabion wall will need to withstand, tonnage of rock used, soil pressure, water pressure, and any surcharge loads, a drainage system to prevent water build-up behind the wall, which can lead to instability, adherence to regulatory and engineering standards. This analysis was not carried out prior to the construction of the car park, as the applicant has not provided it. A structural engineer did an inspection of the car park once it had been built. He has not provided any of the above data and calculations, yet he states that he considers this wall adequate. How has he reached this conclusion? This same engineer is quoted as saying that they would not have advised the wall to be erected in this fashion had they been involved from the outset. We have calculated that the car park has been created from at least 91 tonnes of rock, so it is vital that the structure is designed to the highest safety standards. The owners have been parking their vehicles and trailers here ever since the car park was built. This gabion wall represents 30% of the new parking area, so it is unlikely that they won't park on it. The engineer states that the front of the gabion wall has been set approximately half a metre back from the face of the stone wall. This wall is the boundary between our two properties. We measured the space between the gabions and the wall from our garden last week, and it is only 20 centimetres on the left-hand side and 6 on the right. In 4 months, this car park has already moved 30 to 44 centimetres downslope to our garden. Unless, of course, the engineer was making a guess. Today, we were told that he had included the width of our boundary wall in his measurement. I didn't. Based on our data, this structure has already moved, and so the engineer simply cannot claim that the structure, as built, is stable and safe and will not collapse into our garden. There is a 17-metre high beech tree, which has had its health and stability affected by this work. If it falls, it will fall downslope into our garden. To conclude, the arboriculturalist and structural engineer's reports are based on assumptions and subjective views. They have provided no concrete evidence that the car park and beech tree are safe and stable and do not pose a risk to the lives of us, our family and friends. This application does not meet 3 of the 5 material planning issues: structural integrity of the retaining wall, impact on neighbours' amenity, and impact on trees. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. That was very clear and concise. Our next speaker is Megan Askham. If you'd like to take your seat, please. You have 5 minutes to make your points.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to speak this evening. I commend the Officer's report for its detailed analysis of the proposal and the key issues raised. As noted within the report, the parking area was created to provide additional parking spaces at Mr. Stacey's home to accommodate his family's vehicles and to ensure that the private shared access road always remains clear and safe. The work extended the existing drive at the southern end of the property and consists of the already constructed 1 metre high gabion wall, backfilled and surfaced with tarmac to provide level parking and a turning area. Additionally, the proposed development consists of a fence at the southwestern edge of the site and a carport on top of the area of hard standing. The applicant was unaware that planning permission was needed for this work. However, once he was contacted by the council, he cooperated fully and submitted a retrospective planning application as requested. As members have seen on the site visit today, due to the nature of the site and its surroundings, the site is not visually prominent, and the proposed carport and fencing will not harm the character and appearance of the area. Any potential detrimental impacts on the beech tree adjacent to the site will be mitigated through the use of temporary fencing and screw piles during further development, as recommended by the tree consultant and officer. The tree officer has confirmed that there are now no objections to the proposal. The concerns of the neighbours at 18A Old Hackney Lane regarding the loss of privacy are noted. However, as stated in the officer's report, it is not considered that the overall structure will significantly impact on the light and outlook of this property. The report also notes that setting the car parking space back from the gabion basket and with an intervening fence will reduce any impacts to transitory at worst as people come and go from vehicles. The concerns regarding the structural integrity of the parking space are also acknowledged. However, the respected local structural engineers, Erskine Hunt, have advised that the development is structurally sound, subject to a condition that no vehicle wheels encroach on top of the gabion baskets, and that vehicles using the car parking space are restricted to cars and light vans less than 2.5 tonnes. Any comments that the structure has already moved are incorrect, as classified by Erskine Hunt. The report concludes that there is no sustainable reason for refusal of the application based on the structural integrity of the retaining wall. No other significant issues are raised, and for the reasons discussed, it is respectfully requested that members support the officer's recommendation to approve this application. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Em. Again, that was very helpful. Right, I can ask Chris now to introduce this application and take us through the salient points.
Thank you, Chair. The last speaker succinctly set out the local planning authority's position on this particular application. I think it's important just to touch on the late representations received and some of the comments made by the initial speaker on this item. The structural engineer appointed by the applicant in this particular case has clarified that the measurements that were taken related to the front face of the wall and included the width of the wall in respect of the gabion basket wall that's the subject of this application. And they're satisfied that there hasn't been any lateral movement of the structure. So that's clarified in the late representations that have been received. Members benefited from visiting the site earlier this afternoon to consider the material considerations which are set out in the officer's report. You'll note that officers are happy that the impact of the development on the character and appearance of the surrounding area is acceptable, having regard to the character and nature of development in this area. We're dealing with a site that's within the defined settlement framework of Matlock, within a mainly residential part of the town. We're satisfied that it's additional development which is acceptable in terms of its visual impact and its impact on the character and appearance of that part of the town. We've addressed the impacts of the development on land stability, and we've questioned the structural integrity of this particular structure in some detail. We've asked the applicant to address a number of concerns that have been raised by the neighbour, and we've tried to reflect on all of that in the officer's report, and that's obviously something for members to consider this evening. We've also considered the impact of the development on the tree, the mature beech tree, which is of amenity value, and officers do recognise that. We do accept that there are some shortfalls in the assessment that was carried out, in that the arboriculturist that was appointed to look at the impact on the tree caveated their response to us on the basis they didn't observe, or they don't pass comment on the retrospective works that were undertaken. And we accept that as officers. We've accepted the position of the arboriculturist in respect of further works on site. We're satisfied there wouldn't be further adverse impacts on the health and well-being of the mature beech tree on site. And we're satisfied that with the recommendations that the arboriculturist has made in respect of pruning that tree to basically prevent wind throw and the likelihood of instability and that tree falling is reduced, and that's something that's recognised by the council's arboriculturist in this particular case. So we've considered the impact on the tree. We don't feel there's a sustainable reason for refusal in respect of any adverse impact on that tree. We're happy that the structure is sound, having regard to the advice that we've been given, and we're satisfied that it's acceptable from a character and appearance perspective as well. There are no associated highway safety impacts, hence our recommendation of approval in this case. I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions on this one. Happy to take those.
Thank you, Chris. Yes, as you say, we now move into questions. Can I just remind members that we ask a maximum of 3 questions in one batch? And could you please make sure that they are questions rather than statements? I have Councillor Burton to speak first. David.
Chris, would it be possible, with the absence of the representative of Darlingdale Town Council, to help members in determining the application, could we hear what the objections, please, are from Darlingdale Town Council?
Yes, so I'm assuming they're as set out in the officer's report at section 5.1, where the town council's comments are noted there. What they've said is they initially raised no objection, but then changed view to an objection. They say that the structure has been erected without due consideration to the root protection area of mature beech tree. Structural engineers' letter indicates the driveway is inadequate for loads over 2.5 tonnes, and this concerns over specific wheel placement of vehicles. No evidence of base construction or drainage. Applicant has suggested that a fence be erected on the gabions, but the gabions are not suitable for placing any structure on. With no fence, this would produce light pollution from car headlights directly into the neighbours' upstairs bedrooms. Recommend a site visit by district planning and building control officers.
Thank you, Chris. And just to say that I was present at Darlingdale Town Council last night where this was discussed, and the majority feeling was not to support the application.
Right, Councillor Slack. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions, really. First of all, keeping the vehicles off the gabion baskets. Would it be a small low wall or would it be a fence, Chris? And my second question is the carport. What size would it be? Would the carport overhang over the gabions, or would water drop off the carport onto the gabions baskets?
Sorry, thank you for the question, Councillor Slack.
So repeat them, Chris.
No,
Yeah,
I'm just trying to get a plan on screen that you can probably try and identify on there where the gabion baskets are and where the carport structure will sit.
Yeah.
The measurements of the carport are as set out in the officer's report and the details of the application section. In terms of measures to prevent vehicles encroaching onto the gabion basket walls themselves, you'll note that there's a recommended condition that the measures to prevent that from happening are to be agreed prior to the first use of this area for parking. And the initial speaker has mentioned that parking in that area has already taken place, so there will be an expectation that that will be addressed fairly quickly prior to continued use of that area. That can manifest itself in one of a number of ways in terms of what that might look like in terms of measures to prevent cars encroaching onto the gabion baskets. Yeah. Could be a timber beam across the floor. It could be a relatively diminutive enclosure. Or it'll be something to prevent that encroachment and vehicle tyres in particular putting pressure on the gabion baskets themselves. Yeah. I don't know if you can see on that plan, the gabion baskets are identified by the sort of square annotations on the plan, and you do get a footprint there of the which shows the carport structure. Yeah, and the upstands or the supporting beams to that carport structure are within, not on top of the gabion baskets, they're within the parking area itself.
Will that be a condition then?
It is.
You'll decide, and it'll be a condition.
In terms of preventing cars parking on the gabion baskets and putting pressure on them, then that is conditioned. Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Dobbs, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. It's a question about the surface. If this had come to planning before they'd started work, would we have conditioned the permeability of the hard standing, and would we have conditioned direction of flow of surface water? Thank you.
Yes, surface treatments or the formation of surfacing in a domestic context is something that doesn't need planning permission unless the impermeable area is more than 5 square metres in area and provision isn't made to discharge surface water to a permeable part of the site. So It depends basically on the extent of the area of land that was being hard surfaced and the drainage arrangements that were being proposed in terms of the need or otherwise for planning permission. But this forms part of, you know, wider development which includes engineering works which do require permission, and the surfacing is part and parcel of that, so all of it needs planning permission.
I meant, would you have conditioned a permeable surface?
We would have, I mean, for the amount of development proposed here, we would have required either an impermeable surface, or we'd have looked for measures to collect surface water and discharge it to a permeable part of the site. Surface water from the site couldn't be allowed to just discharge onto neighbouring land. It has to be disposed of within the application site itself.
My third question. My understanding from the site visit is there doesn't seem to be any such provision, and it would strike me as being an impermeable surface.
Yes, that is the case. We've got an impermeable surface here, but we've got proposals, and if members were not happy about the drainage arrangements, those details can be agreed. But it's drainage that will discharge into a permeable part of the site and/or will connect to the existing drainage network. It shouldn't be allowed to discharge onto third-party land.
Councillor Burfoot. Sue.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask what I think is probably quite an obvious question, but I think we need to know. Are we saying that there was no evaluation before this gabion wall was built to look at it, to look at the site in terms of its stability, load-bearing capacity, and the drainage considerations? What was the no evaluation done of that site?
I'm assuming that the works were carried out with good intentions, but it would appear, you know, from the inquiries we've made as officers, that the works were undertaken and then the engineering calculations and assessment of the structure was carried out retrospectively, from my understanding of the situation.
And the other question, the structural engineer seems to indicate that the driveway is inadequate for loads of anything over 2.5 tonnes, but if this application was to be approved, how would we enforce that and monitor it?
My understanding of that restriction is that what the engineer has said is that this is a standard that's applied to all multi-storey car parks or car parking provision. It's a standard calculation or limitation that's imposed in respect of this type of development. In terms of us being able to police it, we can't police it because we can't, you know, measure the weight of vehicles that are using that surface. But the applicant, having carried out this work and being aware of the limitations in relation to that parking area, they will be negligent in that if they were to allow vehicles to park on that area that were in excess of that weight limitation, that they would be potentially, if there was to be an incident, they would be in full knowledge of that and would be liable to any damage that was caused and anything that, you know, had a detrimental impact on the neighbouring property.
Councillor Lees. Stuart.
Thank you, Chair. My question's been answered. It's already been asked. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Councillor Shelley.
Thank you, Chair. I do have some really significant concerns about this application. I think we have to take it at face value that the applicants didn't know that they required planning consent before beginning the works, but they are significant works. And my concern really is in the parts of the report which...
Question, please, Roger.
Yes, I'm getting towards my question. There seem to be parts of the report which are almost written in reverse, so that the questions are being answered without the work having been done. And the one that I particularly want to query really is in 7.12, where there's no... The conclusion of the arborical officer is that, you know, they've got no objection, and yet the content of that paragraph seems to run against that. So he says, or she says that if it were to fail, the stability issue is particularly important. and I'm just reading this, I mean, you can read it yourself, but it seems to imply that damage may have already happened, and yet it doesn't say what would happen if you removed the structure now. Is there an implication that the tree would stand a better chance of coming back to full health? Because my understanding is that it might have actually been seriously affected already. I hope that's clear as a question.
Yeah, that's a matter of judgment, and I think it's a flaw or something that hasn't been fully addressed in the arboricultural statement that was submitted, or report that was submitted with the application. I think there's recognition that they were unable to comment on the adequacy and the nature of the works that were undertaken prior to them being commissioned to look at the development, because development had already taken place at that point. So the damage to the tree and the impact on the future health and well-being of that tree is to some extent an unknown impact and quantity, and that's something that members may wish to consider in their assessment of this application. What our tree officer has said is that there's if there has been any damage to the root system of that tree, pruning, and that's something that's recommended by the applicant's arboriculturist, will help prevent or reduce wind drag, or wind throw that will potentially safeguard that tree from being at risk of falling. It's something that we tried to cover this off in the latter parts of the paragraph, that the tree itself is something that the applicant has retained as part of the development. So it's a liability, or it's a risk to them that they've carried out works within the root protection area of that particular tree. If we'd had this application prior to, if the application was made prior to any works being carried out, we'd have to consider obviously the impact on that tree, and we'd have to make a judgment as to whether we felt the works were so harmful and the tree was of such high amenity value and was visually prominent as to whether we consider protection of the tree. The applicant, for reasons we've set out in the report, we don't feel that it would have passed the test in terms of being a tree where we could have imposed a tree preservation order, and the applicant hasn't removed the tree, but we can't exercise control over the removal of the tree, but they have chosen to retain it in this particular case and must be satisfied that it will be something that can be retained and won't be adversely affected by the developments being carried out, but it's at the developers or the landowners' risk, and the liability sits with them. I know I've sort of gone around the houses there, but I'll try to explain it as best I can, really.
All right, if no further questions, we will move into debate. We have a recommendation for officers to approve with a number of conditions, so I'd like either someone to move that recommendation or an alternative. Over to you, colleagues.
I'm happy to put forward a proposal of refusal of this application, and I would reserve the right to speak later.
I'll second that, Chair.
We have a proposal to refuse, second by Councillor Burfoot, seconded by Councillor Burton. Sue, would you care to venture any reasons as to why you think the application will be refused, or do you want to leave that until later?
No, I would quite like to hear what other people have got to say.
Okay,
Please.
I'll open that up to debate. Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. I do certainly sympathise with the neighbour and their worries in some respects, that of stability. And there was some evidence that, despite the fact that it was coming for discussion tonight, the work was apparently to some extent ongoing, and that is always slightly concerning, more than slightly concerning. I believe that the point I made about the surface is sort of symptomatic of a wider approach to this exercise, and I think that the tree, for example, would presumably be more likely to survive if it had porous top related to its roots so that the water could infiltrate and it could achieve some sort of source in that way. There's much that I find disquieting about this, but I'll wait and hear what other people have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's a very difficult one. I think if it had been done properly, it would have been a concrete retaining wall. It would have been capped with stone. That would have been the proper way to go with drainage underneath. But that hasn't occurred. It's gabion baskets. Gabion baskets are used quite considerably in many areas, especially for the Environment Agency to use them on the riverbanks and so forth, to prop banks up. They do the work really, but there will be a debating point here whether the gabion baskets are as well. They aren't as good as a retaining wall. That's a fact. Whether they are safe is another fact. I think probably they're just safe. I think they are safe, but some people might have a different opinion. Regarding the tree, I think the tree's pretty good, really. I've looked at it, and I think it'll survive the tree, to be perfectly honest. But again, it's it's a matter of opinion. All in all, it's a very difficult to come to a conclusion on this one because the main thing is safety. Is it safe? Will this wall collapse or will it not collapse? I don't think it'll collapse if we keep weight off it, as we're going to do by putting a retaining wall in front of the gabion baskets. And that retaining wall could also be pointed so it could take the surface water right round the corner away from the neighbour's property. That could be a little retaining wall, could be used for that purpose as well as stopping going on the gabion baskets. All in all, I think as it's retrospect, I would not like to refuse it because it's means taking everything down and starting again. But I think it's safe. But it's a judgment I'm not prepared to put 100% on. I'd say 85 to 90% it's safe. That's as far as I can assume it, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Councillor Lees.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, very disappointed in this, really. The engineer's report, to be fair, is too little too late. It should have been done at the initial process when they started the work. We keep going on about the beech tree. Equally, we've seen today, there's a row of bamboo which has got far stretching roots than the beech tree. You know, them roots from them bamboos can penetrate 3 metres. Nothing's been brought up about those. And regarding the baskets, I mean, the way that they're done, they should be filled by hand and layered and done correctly. Looking at what I've seen today, didn't look 100% correct. So I'm not happy at all with the construction method that's been used and how it's been done and everything else that's happened. So I'm just open-minded at the moment. Thank you.
Any further contributions? Councillor Shelley, please.
Thank you again. I mean, I do return to the fact that, to my eyes, the report is very equivocal, not just in relation to the tree matter, but particularly in how it reports the answers of the applicant's own engineer, Erskine Hunt. Those strike me as being incredibly worrying. Point 4 there particularly, would we have advised the wall to be erected in such a manner had we been involved from the outset? No. That's tantamount to a suggestion that there's a significant problem with this. And I come back to Councillor Burfoot's question, which is we don't really know what work, if any, and I think probably given the evidence we've got in front of it, we have to come to a conclusion that there was very little assessment of the land before this work took place. So we are in this invidious position where we're having to make judgments on things where nobody's got any firm evidence at all. And I wish I could be as certain as this idea that it might be 85% safe, but the road to a certain destination is paved with good intentions, and I think we can't just rely on this. I'm concerned when this kind of application comes up because what it seems to me is happening is that our planners are, you know, they're very hard stretched and hard pressed, and there's this, I don't know, there must be a temptation to say, let's leave this to, you know, a potential civil matter after the event, when it comes down to a question then of how deep the litigants' pockets are. And if we're doing anything as a public authority here, surely it's really to hold the ring and to make sure that our residents don't have to go down that route and can rely on us as the council to look after their backs. So those are my real concerns.
Thank you, Roger. I think in relation to your last point, that is one of the reasons, that is the role of this committee. It's we take responsibility for decisions. You're right to point that out, but it is our responsibility. Councillor Burton.
Just to say, individually, I'm uncomfortable with supporting a consent. You know, I believe rules are there and there is a framework that should be adhered to. And I felt for the objectors because, you know, the goalposts were moved and they weren't given a fair opportunity right at the beginning. And there's been a lot of opinion, and some of that opinion may be right, some of it may be wrong. But out of all of this, fundamentally, I don't want to be a part of something that could possibly go pear-shaped. So I'm not prepared to support this as isn't Darlingdale Town Council.
Any further contributions? Councillor Burfoot, so you wanted to come back.
I need to sort of give a little meat to what I said earlier. I think on this one there are just too many doubts and concerns. I think there are concerns about drainage, there's concerns about stability. As a committee, we don't like retrospective applications, but you know, sometimes I do accept that applicants don't always realise that they've got to have planning permission. But the basis of it is whether I can feel in my mind that I've got confidence that this structure is safe. And as it stands at the moment, I haven't got that confidence. The engineer's assessment seems to be based on assumptions rather than fact. And I like to think that, you know, we look at the facts. So I feel as though I can't take the risk. Now, Councillor Shelley brought up a very good point about civil claims. I don't feel that I can be part of a decision to approve this application and then something in the future happens, it's not stable, it does fall, and then the innocent parties then have to bear the cost of going to litigation, and that is not fair. I would just finish by saying that our own officer at 7.14 says that the matter of whether the gabion wall is structurally sound is unclear. That says it all for me, really. And because, you know, I just cannot approve this, which is why I've gone for a refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Burfoot. I think that's helpful. I'm going to ask Chris to comment in a moment, but I think from what I'm hearing from colleagues is that there doesn't appear to be any objection to the principle of the development. The key issues are concerning whether it's constructed in a safe and sustainable and sound method. And we have, as is clear in the report, we have a report from a consultant engineer employed by the applicant, but we have no independent verification or assessment of that. So it may be you would wish for us to obtain such an independent assessment before arriving at a definitive conclusion. But can I ask Chris to comment on those aspects, please?
Thank you, Chair. I mean, listening to the debate, I think members have got a number of concerns. I'd probably need to seek clarity on the exact reasons. I think the first one being related to the stability of the wall, the retaining structure and associated hard standing, and the potential impacts, adverse impacts on the neighbouring property. I draw members' attention to the requirements of policy PD9, which deals with unstable land, and what that policy says is that the District Council will ensure that sites are suitable for their proposed use, taking account of ground conditions and land instability. So I think a reason for refusal would need to be framed around that requirement of policy PD9. What I'm not clear on is whether you feel that the development that's taken place and the encroachment within the root protection area of the mature beech tree, whether you're concerned that that the development has had a detrimental impact on the health and well-being of that tree and could result in its consequential loss to the detriment of the amenity of the area, and that's something you might want to think about as well. I think some members have mentioned that, but I don't know whether that that would be something you'd want to feature in any second reason for refusal.
Chris, as Chair, can I ask you whether you'd be comfortable with a refusal on those grounds, or whether you would prefer to seek independent assessment of the stability of the structure?
Well, it's a matter of judgment for members if they feel that they would benefit from that independent assessment. There are, I mean, the first speakers and within the officer's report, there is recognition there are some questions, let's say, or the integrity of the wall is a matter of judgment, and I think members are entitled to come to a view that they're not happy that it's been demonstrated to their satisfaction that it would be structurally sound in this particular case. I don't think it's an unreasonable position to adopt if members want to go down that route.
Presumably, Chris, then we would enforcement would require the removal of the structure. Is that the case?
I think with instructions of members, because there's one of two routes. We can, if members are reminded to refuse the application, what would happen is that the applicant would have a right of appeal. There's one of two options. We could follow it up with an enforcement notice requiring the removal of the structure, and that shortens the time period that the applicant has to appeal the decision to refuse planning permission. I think it's 28 days that they're then given to lodge an appeal to the planning inspectorate. Bear in mind that an enforcement appeal will take time to be considered. It just speeds that process up, not massively, because the appeal, I think at the moment there's a 4-month waiting time just to register new appeals. So by the time that's taken its course and we've got a decision from the planning inspectorate, we're could be 6 months down the line. But I'm happy to take instructions on that. Right. Does anyone want to make any further comment before we take a vote on this?
Yes, Chair. There was one thing that fundamentally disappointed me on site today, and that was the applicant's agent, because when we were asking questions, the agent wasn't able to give us an answer. And right the way through this whole saga, it seems to degenerate to this sort of staticness where we're at. I'm sorry, I'm very black and white on this sort of thing, and it's a retrospective application, and we have every right on the basis of that, if members have good reasons and are mindful, to refuse it.
Any further contributions? Peter Dobbs, Councillor Dobbs.
Just briefly to get back to a point which I think is the mood of the meeting, that is, we're fine with it existing, we just want it built properly. And is there a route from where we are to that?
Chris, would you like to give a direct answer to that?
I think if members are happy that the development is acceptable in terms of its impact on the character and appearance of the area, the impact on the tree and all the other material considerations that we've identified in the report, and the only issue is one of the structural integrity of the retaining wall and the associated parking area. Deferment to seek further clarity on that, reassurances that it is structurally sound, and any remedial works that would be necessary could be a route forward in that respect.
Just to add, I am concerned about the tree, and I think a porous surface would actually alleviate that potentially. I'm not a tree specialist, but my guess is that that might help. What I don't want to do is to set in place things which actually might damage the tree further, and that would seem to be also the mood of the meeting.
So Slack.
Thank you, Chair. Chris, if the we was to refuse it, which it looks well maybe, the gaming baskets would have to be brought out, and would I suppose it's up to a surveyor, but a concrete retaining wall, but would have to replace the gaming baskets. That's the danger part into the gaming baskets. We're not certain if they're safe.
It depends on ultimately the reasons for refusal. If there was two reasons, the first being the integrity of the wall, and the second being the potential adverse impacts on the tree. Any development in the root protection area of that tree, a concrete retaining wall could potentially be much more damaging to the root protection area of that tree. And I think you need to bear that in mind. What we'd find is that it's highly likely, if we were to go down the refusal route and serve an enforcement notice, is that an appeal will be lodged and an inspector will, cast judgment on all of those things. And we need to wait the outcome of that.
Thank you.
Councillor Boynton.
Just a little bit concerned about this tree being somewhat of a red herring in terms of ground for refusals. If I have understood it right, there's no preservation order on this tree, and actually the owner of it could actually take it down at any time he wants to take it down, which would negate any conversation we're having in relation to the tree at the moment. Am I right with that thinking, Chris?
And that is the case. There's nothing to stop that tree being removed. It's not something, we can't exercise control over that, unfortunately.
Right, we need to reach a conclusion on this. I have to say, if this were refused and we found ourselves embroiled in an appeal against enforcement, it seems to me that we would need to engage technical expertise to be able to respond to counter the engineer's assessment that the applicant has made. So it does seem to me to defend an appeal, we would at the very least need to engage some technical expertise at that stage. So a question for me is, would it not be better to engage that at this stage rather than later on? But that's my take on it. Just before we move to a vote, I would advise local members to look at a request to put a tree preservation order on this particular specimen. Having looked at it on site today, in my view, it's eminently suitable. It's eminently suitable to have a TPO put on it. It's a prominent species in the locality. Right, unless anyone wants to move anything to the contrary, I'm going to take a vote on the proposal to refuse. Right, all those in favour, please show on the proposal to refuse. All those against, please show. And anyone abstaining? No, so that is refused. And Chris, you're confident you've got sufficient reasons for refusal there?
I must admit, I'm not sure what the reasons are. So I think that would be helpful if they're clarified.
I'm going to ask the proposer and seconder to articulate something helpful to Chris.
Well, I'm not an engineer, but from listening carefully to the debate and comments from members and from the representations that were made, this business, and how do you pronounce it? Gambians? What? Gabions. I mean, fundamentally, I think it was Stuart that made the point that your view, if I got it right, Stuart, was that they may possibly not have been correctly assembled. And you know, these are aspects that we need to be utterly confident that that structure, in our view, perhaps it hasn't been done to the spec, that if a proper planning application had been formally submitted at the beginning, we perhaps could have demanded that these engineering aspects were properly achieved, that we would have been then comfortable enough to have been able perhaps to have supported, if that makes sense.
Would it help if it was phrased around significant concerns relating to the instability of the land with the structure that's placed upon it at present, in relation to policy PD9 that you mentioned, Chris?
Say, Chris, is that one reason? Are you saying that is not enough?
No, I think we can, you know, use that as a basis for refusing the application. My understanding is the reason for refusal is one relating to concerns about the stability of the land. So I think it's the development as carried out, in terms of the nature of the construction and the associated retaining structures, is such that the local planning authority is not satisfied that it will not result in instability of the ground and potential detrimental impacts on neighbouring properties. I think it's a reason along those sort of lines. I think you're looking at voting on, from what I understand.
Thank you, Chris. I think that's very helpful. Thank you for helping colleagues out with that. Right, so that application is...
What about the aspect in terms of drainage as well? Because previously you got a garden area where there was natural soakaway, and you know, you've now got an area where with intense rainfall, it would be wrong if that just simply gets emitted onto the neighbouring garden. You know, it didn't seem satisfactory on site, what we saw in terms of current drainage.
I think we could look at a second, what I'd refer to as a second reason for refusal that is based on lack of information. So you could say insufficient information has been submitted to satisfy the district council that surface water from the surface as constructed will be discharged in a manner which will not result in, you know, flooding of the local area, something like that, or you know, detrimental impacts again on neighbouring properties. So would it be both of those reasons? Okay.
Thanks, David. That again is helpful. Right, we'll move on to the second application for determination this evening. This is the application for the land of Chesterfield Road and Quarry Lane in Matlock, and it is a reserved matters approval relating to the previously granted outline planning permission for 75 dwellings. Members will recall this was deferred at our previous meeting in December. We now have Councillor Steve Wayne, who is the ward member, who is going to comment on our application. Steve, you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say...
It's a ward member, not the ward member.
Yeah. Right, just excuse me for 1 second. Right, thank you. My name is Steve Wayne. I am the ward member for the adjacent ward of All Saints, that is now Matlock West. I'm also, what I'm mainly speaking to you about this evening is my role as flood warden, which is a totally voluntary role, and basically it's a role that I've undertaken for 5 years. I don't profess to be a professional or an expert in any way.
Neither am I, what I would say, I'm not misinformed or confused in the way that I present this case. I want to speak before the committee this evening. I'm genuinely concerned regarding surface water flows from developments in the Chesterfield Road area, including this development. One of my initial observations of these plans was that the surface water from the outside of the proposed development area was to be captured by a series of swales and dams along the eastern boundary. The exceedance route is usually a land drain, which for this application would hopefully intercept surface water from around 5 hectares of sloping woodland. However, there is no visible definitive outfall for that exceedance, or there wasn't on the initial plans, exceedance route where it meets Chesterfield Road. With no definitive outfall and little or no infiltration possible due to the land, the pipe or trench will hold a significant amount of water at its lowest point until it reaches capacity, and it is then likely to result in overspill and flooding across Chesterfield Road. This is not what I perceive to be betterment, because it already does that. It is my understanding that with no definitive outfall for the exceedance route, water will back up in the trench as far as the swale and potentially run under the swale and could adversely affect houses on both Thornbury's and Quarry Lane. To date, I have not seen any revised drainage plans from the developer on the portal, but the developer has now revised the layout of the site, which significantly reduces the area around the exceedance route outfalls by proposing, and is also proposing, to put 8 houses directly facing the crest of the attenuation pond. I also noticed that 50 metres of the drainage infrastructure on Chesterfield Road was unable to be accessed because of the CCTV cameras could not access that particular part of the section of pipe work, and it also should be noted that 50 metres of pipe work above this area was also in very poor condition. This was not considered on the 13th of December 2022. Councillor Slack highlighted my concerns about the water going into the Bentley Brook. The Bentley Brook catchment is a highly sensitive catchment, and also a recent report that came out after this was agreed at outline has highlighted it that there are significant concerns with the Bentley Brook catchment and the pump station at Knowlston Place. Foul waste is already surcharging into the public highway at various points down Lumsdale Road at times of significant rainfall. This development the development of another 75 homes will further exacerbate the issues with comprehensive action, unless there is comprehensive action from Severn Trent Water. I've recently had another complaint from a member of the public at the last storm we had, where it just pumped, a big drain cover was just thrown off and human waste was coming out into the roadway at the bottom of Lumsdale Road. I am aware of residents who have also had to walk in human waste to get to their homes, and others that have complained about the stench of rotting human waste. This is totally unacceptable in the 21st century, but this is what we are accepting of by continuing to improve large developments without comprehensive physical assessments. It is a shame that things have come to this, and basically, in my opinion, it is down to lack of rigorous scrutiny of the development plans supplied by the developers, not only on this site, but many other sites throughout the planning district area, such as Whiteley in Tansley, Treetops in Matlock, and more recently, sites in Ashbourne. It is totally unacceptable for new owners to move into their houses on new developments, genuinely believing that it is for their forever home, only to find that their home may flood, and their garden regularly, in a lot of these developments, is waterlogged even in summer. I urge this council and this planning committee to ensure that we never again find ourselves in this situation in relation to large-scale developments. We must also ensure that we are fully satisfied with all the elements of the surface water and foul drainage at outline application, and be assured that the existing infrastructure can work effectively from the start. I would personally like to see Severn Trent Water be a statutory consultee on all large applications, so they can give up-to-date assessment and not a historical one. We must also ensure that all statutory consultees rigorously investigate and challenge developers on each application, and I urge this council to consult with Severn Trent Water every time. Finally, I urge planners and chairs of this committee to ensure that when the 10 conditions for this application are returned for approval of works, they work collaboratively, rigorously, to assess to work undertaken and check viability, seeking advice from qualified partners where necessary. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Steve. Points well made there. We now have the agent for the application, the applicant, Sarah Willis. Sarah, you also have 5 minutes to address us.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to speak again. My name is Sarah Wills of 1947, who are acting as agent on behalf of the applicant, Homes by Honey. As described previously, we returned to committee following a deferral against officer recommendation on the 12th of December, in which members have sought further information to re-evaluate drainage proposals, seek confirmation from Severn Trent Water that they can facilitate the anticipated foul water drainage from the development site, and seek confirmation on minimum space standards to be adhered. I will take each of these in turn. Whilst this has been adequately explained by both officers and ourselves previously, drainage is not a matter for consideration under this reserved matters application. Owing to the misunderstandings on this point at committee in December, Homes by Honey have provided a legal note at their own cost to provide assurance to members that discussing matters relating to drainage under this application is in fact unlawful. The note concluded that given drainage was approved as per the planning permission, it is unlawful to seek to derogate from that which has already been granted. Irrespective of this point, both the local authority officer and the client have sought an additional response from Severn Trent. The up-to-date response we do have is dated the 3rd of November. It confirms where the site foul water gravity flows will connect to the combined network, the proposed development should have no adverse effect on the system and can be accommodated. And further, a connection at a new or existing foul network would be acceptable. The recent response states that advice remains as stated in November and remains valid. The drainage engineer has provided a further supporting note explaining that incidents relating to the sewerage network in Matlock have been reported closer to the town centre, affecting a different sewerage network. The lead local flood authority have raised no comments regarding flooding and drainage and considered the technical assessments at outline stage. The technical details for the discharge of conditions via the outline application are well progressed and will be submitted in due course, in which the officers will deal with using technical input from statutory consultees. This aligns with the Council's constitution, and derivation away from this process would be unlawful. On NDSS minimum space standards, it must be reiterated that Derbyshire Dales does not formally adopt the requirement for NDSS, and they don't outline specific space standards within local planning policy. Regardless of this fact, the House Type Pack dated the 27th of October states that the Avocado house types have an area of 70 square metres. The NDSS states that 2-storey, 2-bedroom dwellings for 3 people should be at a minimum of 70 square metres. So the Avocado house type is therefore NDSS compliant. The housing officer has today agreed that there is no flexibility to be prescriptive away from a 2-bed, 3-person property. This results in only 5 affordable house types out of the 23 not meeting NDSS compliance, but there is no policy requirement to do so. These are also all first homes and therefore comply with the Section 106 in full. Ortsia Homes have responded directly to the housing officer's query about the sales potential of those number of properties to the registered provider. They are happy with the space standard and the mix of affordable units are appropriate and acceptable to them. They commend the scheme and feel that the mix and distribution of affordable homes will meet with their requirements in terms of management and suitability for future residents. Within the context of no 5-year housing land supply, full affordable housing compliance, and policy HC11, which encourages a mix to respond to identified need and support the housing land supply, this application is compliant. It was pleasing to be in receipt of a positive recognition for the proactive engagement undertaken between the LPA officers and applicants on this site in the previous committee. Positive comments were received from councillors, including that this is an excellent development in terms of layout and design. This accurately summarises the process to date. The application has been recommended to the Planning Committee by officers following 2 rounds of consultation and subsequent design review meetings between the applicant and the local planning authority to produce a revised scheme. It has no consultee objections following a responsive approach from our client to address feedback received with the overall aim to bring a high quality housing scheme to Matlock. And I would urge you to undertake a decision making on this application within the parameters of the reserve matters application before you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that was very clear. If I just reassure members before Chris speaks to the application that it's not unlawful for us to discuss any matters which we think are relevant at this meeting. Right. Where have I got to? Right. As we know, this is an application which was deferred from a last meeting, so I'm anxious that we don't repeat, if we can help it, the same debate and discussion that we had last time, but we focus on the issues, the reasons for the deferral and the responses which we've had in response to that. So Sarah is going to talk to that and explain the reasons why this is being recommended for approval. Thank you, Sarah.
There are late reps to be read before I speak, if we could, please.
Right. Sorry, I lost my piece of paper there. So everyone's taken in the advice from the housing service at the council and our officer's response to that. Sarah, over to you now.
Right, obviously, this is outline planning permission was granted in March 2023. This proposal seeks the following to approve the following reserve matters. So we're looking at layout, scale, appearance, and landscaping. Sarah's mentioned why we deferred it last time. I'll just summarise where we are now in terms of what information was provided after the deferment. We got a technical note from the agent's drainage engineer. We got an updated note from Hawksia Homes, the registered provider, and we got a legal note from Freeths regarding determination of reserve matters applications. So obviously I as officer have gone back to Severn Trent, asked for a further response. I have got that. That's in paragraph 5.7, confirming capacity of foul flows from the proposed development. The latest response we've got from is the 3rd of November, which is in timescale. A review of the affordable housing scheme in respect of the compliance with the nationally designed space standards. We've undertaken that. We've got updated housing comments in the rate reps. All the affordable units to be managed by the registered provider do comply with the NDSS standard. Five of the dwellings don't comply, and they are all first homes, which are not RP affordable housing units. They are units that would go directly from the developer to the purchaser, and so aren't run by an RP. Happy to take any questions.
Right, we'll open this up to questions. If I can just make members aware, re-emphasise what Sarah says, that this is an application for reserved matters, and we need to be very clear what those matters are. The issues which concern members at our December meeting are principally related to drainage, and you'll note from the helpful letter from Reiths that those issues are subject to a number of detailed conditions. The compliance with those conditions will be evaluated and addressed at a later stage in the determination of this application. You have had a suggestion from Councillor Wayne that members are associated in some way with that evaluation determination process, which is an issue you might like to return to at some stage during the debate. But question first on the substantive issues, the reserved matters. Councillor Dobbs first.
A question that Chris very kindly answered before, but just to share it with you. There is a precedent for discussing, for introducing conditions at reserved matter stage, conditions pertaining to surface water drainage. There's a precedent in Ashbourne. Could he confirm or otherwise whether we can introduce a condition at this stage?
Thank you, Councillor Dobbs. The local planning authority can impose conditions that it deems, any condition that it deems appropriate, but those conditions must relate specifically to the approval of reserved matters that we're looking at this evening. In the case of the Ashbourne application, what I know from our discussion you're referring to there is attenuation features on sites. Often those features sit outside of the adopted drainage network, whether that's on site or part of the wider drainage network, and often officers, as part of agreeing landscaping and those landscape features, have to consider the future maintenance and management of those features. So in that scenario, when considering matters of landscaping as part of the public open space serving that development, we have to look at maintenance and management regimes for those particular features. Hence, in those scenarios, well, we can impose conditions that deal with that element of a development, but not the principle, not the drainage network serving the development itself, the adoptable drainage network. It's the part of the drainage network that forms part of the public open space and landscaping serving new development. I hope that provides some clarity.
Thank you, Chris. It does. I don't actually think the precedent that I mentioned is quite like that. It was a series of conditions and not entirely related to what you just mentioned. But thank you.
Councillor Slack.
Thank you, Chair. My first question, question is hardly a question. I want clarity on what's lawful and what's not lawful, unlawful. Is it unlawful now to speak about potential flooding into Bentley Brook from this development? Is it unlawful to speak about that?
But the message that we've had from the developer, it's something that we as officers share, is that those matters sit outside of the scope of the assessment of this particular application. So whilst we're aware of the flooding and the concerns that have been raised, they're matters of detail that we'll have to agree as part of the conditions attached to the outline permission, which gave consent for this amount of development on this particular site. So raising those issues in respect of this particular application that just concerns matters of detail would be unlawful, particularly, well, you can raise them, you can express concerns, but for example, to refuse the application on such grounds would be unlawful and open to challenge by way of judicial review.
So it is lawful to speak about potential flooding from this development, or unlawful? I don't want to go against the law.
There's nothing that prevents you from talking about it and expressing concerns, but all I'd say is it's not relevant in respect of the assessment of this particular application. It's not unlawful to speak about it, but if you was to refuse it on such grounds, then that would be unlawful.
Okay, thank you.
The only thing that I would say is that it's the chair's discretion as to what we discussed, and it needs to be relevant to the application. Councillor Burfoot.
Thank you, Chair. Given all the information that our officers have had from Severn Trent, the local flood authority, what I need to ask them is, are they absolutely confident that everything's been rigorously assessed by Severn Trent and the local flood authority, and that even when this development happens, that it's not going to add to an already failing system that nobody seems to want to address?
Officers are satisfied that the competent authorities in this particular case are satisfied that surface water flows and foul flows from the development can be accommodated without resulting in flooding issues, whether it's on the site or beyond the site itself. I covered this at the last meeting. This particular development does include a much wider catchment than the application site itself. So applying the principles of sustainable urban drainage and having attenuation on site that deals with a much greenfield runoff rate for a larger catchment than the application site builds in capacity for climate change and of 40% should in theory offer betterment in terms of storage capacity and controlled discharge into the receiving watercourse. There will be some interaction with the drainage network, but the intention here is to cross Chesterfield Road and discharge into the Bentley Brook in fairly close proximity to the application site. So the risks from I'm not a drainage expert, I think I've said this last time, but the risks of overloading the system as a result of surface water in this location, having regard to the proposed outfall, is very minimal in my view. There will be additional foul flows that will enter the network, and Severn Trent Water have reassured officers that there is sufficient capacity within their network to accommodate foul flows, and they're legally obliged to accommodate foul flows from new developments. If their infrastructure isn't adequate, they have to upgrade that infrastructure to accommodate foul flows from new development, and that's a responsibility that lies squarely with the water company in this particular case.
And I do have another question. First of all, I hope you're right, Chris. I suppose I'm not going to get an answer to this really, but we've still got 5 out of the 23 that don't meet the NDSS standards, and I realise that they're not going to be taken on by the registered landlords, but they are going to be purchased by people. And if I could ask the developer, if I could, but I can't, why wouldn't you want to build them to the standards? Why wouldn't you want to? People are going to be living in these houses.
I'm sure Chris will, Sarah will respond to that.
Yes, the development plan, within it, there is a policy that deals with housing mix, and the policy refers to number of bedrooms. It doesn't set space standards, and I suppose you could argue it's a flaw in the development plan, that it's number of bedrooms and not based on size and floor area of properties that are being built. What I would say is that the developer will have a range of housing types, and you often find that open market housing is below, nationally described space standards, and it's very much, demand driven. These are smaller units. People will, I'm sure, the developer wouldn't build houses they didn't think they could sell, and these will be sold at a discount open market rate. So the smaller houses that will be generally more affordable to young people and people that are perhaps wanting to downsize, but also the properties that will be sold at a discounted rate as well, below market value of at least 25%. So that should, present young people or people wanting to downsize with opportunities to buy more affordable properties within the Matlock area.
Right, I think, if I can help answer that as well, I think our Section 106 agreement is at fault here, in that it only applies the space standards to the units which are going to be acquired by a registered provider, rather than applying them to all affordable housing. So I think we'll need to take the opportunity to revisit the way we structure our Section 106 agreements. Councillor Archer, Robert.
Thanks, Chair. I think to an extent, Chris sort of covered what I was going to ask in his answer to Councillor Burfoot's first question, but just for absolute clarity, I think I can see where this is heading. So I was just going to say, at the moment, the council is going through a Section 19, I think that's right, flood inquiry from a recent flooding event. And I think the concern of everyone around this table at this meeting tonight is that there's a possibility that we'll sit in here in the future and there might be another flood inquiry going on that may, I'm not saying it will, but that may suggest that if we approve this and it goes ahead, this could be cited, this development, as a cause for further flooding. Now, I know there's lots of assurance given it won't. I very much hope it doesn't. If that is the case, though, and an inquiry finds in the future that this development, if we approve it, does result in a flood event, where does liability lie in terms of putting things right and adjusting the infrastructure retrospectively if we're not doing it now?
Theoretically, that shouldn't happen if we follow the principle, or if we agree with the principles that have been established at outline stage, and we have regard to the sustainable urban drainage measures that have been secured. So in this particular case, in danger of repeating myself here, but you've got a wider catchment, you've got greenfield runoff rate calculations and additional attenuation to deal with climate change. So with all of that, and with the issue comes with controlled discharge into the receiving water course, and provided we're satisfied that that works properly and that there is that controlled discharge into the receiving water course, then I think we can be reassured that this development shouldn't make the situation of flooding any worse within the local area or the wider town.
I understand that, but I also listen carefully to what our flood warden said, and I know that local knowledge can stand for a lot as well as the sort of the technical advice. And I, as I said in my question, I very much hope that is correct, and I'm not saying it won't be. I'm not saying I don't trust the experts, but equally, we've had many flooding events recently. And again, I'm sorry
Robert,
to push
can you
on it.
make it a question?
Just sorry to actually push on. Well, yeah, I didn't feel sorry, Chris, I don't feel you quite answered the question. If we are wrong, and if there is a flooding event, who's liable to make adjustments?
The only flaw I can see personally, from my experience of dealing with all quite a significant number of significant housing developments across the district, is the outfall, control of the outfall. As an authority, we have recently looked at verification of approved systems at the end of the construction process to be satisfied that the surface water drainage systems on site have been delivered as set out and approved by officers. What we've found is that When that's tested at appeal, such conditions are considered to not be necessary because we're duplicating other regimes. So we found that verification of these systems and conditions that deal with that are struck out at appeal by appeal inspectors, because as part of building new development, as part of the building regulation process, you have to demonstrate that the development will be appropriately drained, and that's both foul and surface water. So it'll have to be demonstrated that appropriate connections to drainage network or outfalls to receiving water course are made, which considers all the same things we consider as part of the planning process. And I think there's a real danger that planning is seen as a safety net for dealing with all matters relating to development. And the government are very clear that that's not how planning should work. Very clear in terms of both imposition of conditions and how we assess applications, that we shouldn't be duplicating or imposing additional restrictions and controls that sits outside of the remit, in this particular remit of planning. In this particular case, the development does, in theory, achieve betterment. In terms of the future management of the network, some of that will be adopted by the water company. Some of it will likely fall within the management regime of a residence management company. And we have to trust and have faith that, you know, all of that will happen and will be managed appropriately. And we do have conditions that deal with future management. At the moment, there isn't an adoption of a body which adopts drainage networks and surface attenuation features, but that's something the government's looking at the moment in terms of whether that responsibility will lie with the water company or lead local flood authority to have, you know, a stake in such infrastructure, and will in the future adopt it. But at the moment, we have the regime that we've got, and a residence management company, we have to trust that, you know, that they can deliver what's expected of them.
Any further questions, colleagues? No, we're going to move into debate. Now, I don't want to stifle debate, I want to encourage it, but just to remind colleagues that we're focusing on the reserved matters here, and as you've heard, that is the scale, the layout, the appearance, and the landscaping of the development. We've heard that the conditions which are imposed on at the outline stage relating to drainage, they remain to be determined or discharged, to use the technical term, at a later stage in the process. And if you wish, we can discuss the way in that is handled. But at the beginning, if we could focus on any issues to do with the reserved matters. We have the recommendation from our officers to approve the application as submitted. Again, do we have anyone who wishes to move that recommendation or an alternative? Councillor Archer.
Right, okay. So I think the silence was deafening there, and I think we're all sitting here thinking we've not really got much of a choice, potentially, although I may be wrong, that we probably have to go along with the recommendation, so I will move it. But I have big concerns about the drainage, but I understand that's not something we can use as a reason to stop it at this stage. So I think, therefore, I will move it because no one else will, but not really because I'm particularly keen to move it. And it'll at least open a debate and allow people to discuss and explore matters further. But I think in terms of the reserved matters that we're actually assessing right now, I'm happy to move it on that basis, despite underlying concerns about future potential flooding events and who's liable, which perhaps I still want to question a little bit more in debate.
Thank you, Councillor Archer. That was very helpful. We have a seconder?
Thank you, Chair. I'll second it. Like Councillor Archer, I've got grave reservations, and we're not able to go there. I feel disappointed potentially for the people that live in that part of the world. We don't seem to have any redress if anything goes wrong. I do wonder who holds some of these organisations' feet to the fire. It's great to hear that the government are looking into these matters. but with a heavy heart, I will second it.
Thank you. That's helpful again. Now, any further contributions to debate, please? Councillor Dobbs.
Thank you, Chair. It does seem that we've been painted into a corner, or painted ourselves into a corner. But I guess that if we look to the conditions for the outline pertaining to drainage of both kinds, there are some significantly robust things. If we can pick up, I can pick up your point, Chair, as to our role in seeing the discharge of those conditions, because I'm afraid, as far as the examples I've looked at, it does seem that some of these SUDS drainage systems, particularly in Ashbourne, do not appear, with my untutored eye, to be performing exactly as they were planned. And Chris knows very well one development 6 years old where there's significant expense being spent by the developer to put it right. And in the meantime, there's been flooding events, which may or may not be linked. This is the problem that we face. And we've got to ensure that those conditions are applied and applied rigorously. And some of the questions that I really want to ask at some point is, how are those things assessed? But that's not perhaps for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Further contributions? Councillor Slack. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Just regarding the moment, as we've been instructed, that we can't talk about flooding or drainage. The good points of this is this 30% affordable housing. I'm not convinced by the market price as a discount to 25% because they're poorer quality, they're smaller. You're getting what you're paying for, and you're probably 25% less amenities in these low price houses. So it's much better to generally give affordable housing and social or a contribution. It's pretty well bit overdevelopment, probably. Maybe too many houses for that area, overdevelopment. Squashed in a little bit. There's areas of it to where there could be local flash flooding occurring because of the technology, the landscaping. But coming back, just mentioning it, that insurance companies now are lifting their rates up for certain areas where there's flooding. So insurance companies are usually right when it comes to assessing things, as where flood risks occur. They're going to lift their insurance up. They don't like to lose, insurance companies don't, and it really points to that there's great areas in this country where flooding will occur, and you won't go far wrong if you follow the insurance companies where they not insuring some areas, in fact. Coming back, I would feel very sorry, just to say it, for people at Matlock Green, if the Knowlton Place pumping station failed, which it nearly did in 2000. We was only a hair's breadth away from it flooding old Matlock Green. And Tony and myself, who were there, we nearly had to shut all everything off and run because the water was coming right up to the electrics. And that was in 2000. Climate change, we all know, we can't deny it, is getting worse and worse and worse. And we must take account of this. If we don't, we do it at our peril. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Any further contributions? Councillor Shelley?
I don't feel particularly qualified to talk about many of the matters that have come up on previous occasions in relation to this one. I mean, I will mention the word cumulative once again because I feel duty-bound to do that, and I don't mean that with all disrespect to the developer. To me, actually, it looks like, perhaps contrary to one or two other people have said, a well laid out site now, and I think that is the advantage of discussion over time. I can see that. I mean, even looking at the map that I can see here in front of me, there's a considerable amount of green space there. So I do commend that. it's the kind of place perhaps in another world that I might even end up living in. But I think it is very unfortunate that previous decisions of this council have perhaps been, I will use the word, I was going to use the word unsound, I don't think that's fair actually, but perhaps not scrutinised to the extent that they should have been at the time, and we are left carrying the can. And I'm afraid that metaphor is a bit unfortunate again.
Yes, before I ask Councillor Archer to sum up as he proposed the motion, if I can comment from the chair that Councillor Dobbs, I think, has made what I consider to be an eminently sensible suggestion, which reflects the sentiments, I think, of most, if not all, members of this committee. That is that this committee supports officers in the process of discharging the conditions relating to the drainage of the site over the next few months. Normally this is delegated fully to officers, and it's important we don't seek to undermine the role of our officers in this. It's important that we seek to support them. I'm going to ask Helen Mitchell if she'd like to comment on whether there is a way in which we could constructively contribute to that process.
Thank you, Chair. So just to confirm that the Council's constitution does state very clearly that it's the role of officers through delegated functions in which to discharge of conditions. So members are discussing and wanting, from what I'm hearing, to have an additional level of oversight in those conditions. What I would want to sort of understand really, in order to craft any arrangement that members are wanting to agree tonight, is what the level of that is. Is it at a consultation level with, say, the chair or the deputy or deputies, or is it at full committee level? In answering that question, members may wish to balance the sort of efficiency of doing things and also the effectiveness, and whether members believe it is more effective to do things at committee or through the chairs of the committee working with the officers. So just to say, this would obviously be for this application only, but I'll be keen to hear from members on what type of oversight they are wanting, so it's very clear from the resolution, please.
So if I could ask the proposer and seconder to comment on that initially.
Yeah, I think ultimately the reason this has been such a protracted process is because people in the committee know that our hands are tied to an extent on the issue that we have the biggest concern about, and that the only way we have now at this stage of trying to ensure we do safeguard against flooding and drainage issues and flooding is through conditioning. And therefore, if there is anything at all we can do at this stage to make sure that we have got more oversight, I think was the word was used, which seems appropriate, on the enforcement of conditions, to make sure that they are strictly adhered to make sure that flooding risk is minimised to its greatest possible extent, then it would be great if we could add that in some way to, I don't know if we need to add it at this point before we vote, or if it needs to be noted by officers. I don't know what the process will be, so I would seek some guidance on that, but I think we would like that, I think, around this table, probably.
I'll just bring Dermot in first. Dermot, can you give us your perspective?
I have every confidence in the officers, the process that they go through. My concerns relate to outside bodies and the fact that they're always happy to say they've got capacity to look after these sites and whatever. That's my main focus. I personally would love for us to get Severn Trent to come and talk to us about the methods they use to actually arrive at these conclusions. That's where the problem is. The officers, as I've said before, they're not experts. They rely on the experts who give them the data and the information. And I'll support whatever the officers are wanting to do. There's another body I'd like to see come and talk to us, obviously not in a planning meeting, obviously, but be scrutinised by us, and so we understand better their processes, because I don't have too much faith currently. Thank you.
Helen's going to come back in a moment, but before she does, Peter, you put the proposal forward, and our Vice Chair would also like to make a comment. Peter first.
Thank you, Chair. To be perfectly honest, if we confine it to this application, I don't think the load on committee time would be too onerous. And they come in sections, don't they? And they could just be presented in that way. I think that's what I would like to see. And I totally pick up on Councillor Murphy's point that, yes, it is the problem of the evaluation of these reports that come from Lead Local Flood Authority or Severn Trent Water that I suppose that we are concerned about. We want to see the evidence. You know, it is so frustrating in the context of, yes, we can take the foul water, which they've said now twice in almost exactly the same form of words. Well, just show us the data, please. How big are your pipes? What's the current flow rate? This sort of thing. This is just what I'm looking for. Sorry.
So.
Yeah, I feel the need to speak. I have to say that, you know, as developments go, I think this is a good development. The problem is, as Councillor Shelley said, it's the cumulative effect of all these developments that we've had in Matlock. Now, I'm a Matlock member, so, you know, I've obviously got an interest in all this, but there are too many people in Matlock who are suffering from being flooded. They're having their gardens soaked. They're not living on these new developments. They are suffering from the results of these new developments. And, you know, that's really the point I want to make. I go along with what Councillor Murphy said, in that, you know, we talk about drainage, we talk about flooding. We've never got these experts here to defend themselves and to be questioned. And it's not fair on our planners to have to defend the position of the Flood Authority and Severn Trent. I'm sure you admit that you're not experts in that, and neither are any of us, I presume, but they don't come. And I think we've got to make a big point about this, that, you know, in big applications, really controversial ones, we insist that they present themselves.
Well, I'm going to bring Helen in now, but bear in mind, when these conditions are discharged, they're discharged on the basis of evidence. And I think what's being suggested is that members are associated with the consideration of that evidence. Helen, you want to perhaps make a proposal to us?
Oh, I think just to say, Chair, that the frustrations of members on the issue around flooding is absolutely clear. And just to say that the Scrutiny Committee are doing a review on flooding and the experiences of flooding. It's just about to start in order to hear members on this issue, and Councillor Murphy's quite right in identifying organisations that the Scrutiny Committee will be taking evidence of. That said, that is a different fora from today, and we're at Planning Committee dealing with an application. I sense the room is a little split on the role of the committee. I'm hearing that there are some members that want to see the Constitution completely upheld as it is, and that is let officers get on with the work around the discharge of conditions. There's an opportunity in which to bring the committee in, to give the committee greater oversight. One of the things, Chair, we've not heard from is the case officer, Sarah, in this, on the impact that would create if the committee did wish to undertake any of those functions, or indeed just have an in-consultation type arrangement with Sarah. I think it's absolutely obvious that Sarah will be leaving this meeting with the clear intention of keeping members abreast on this application and how it will work. So my proposal really is to retain the arrangement that officers keep within the Constitution, and that is to delegate the work to them, but that Sarah might wish to discuss with the committee how just to keep them abreast of this informally. And if there are any concerns, I'm absolutely confident that she will come to the chair and to you all in due course. Given the room is split on the matter, I wanted to offer that first, and we keep the arrangement, but Sarah shares with us how she can keep the committee informed on this important matter to them.
I'll bring Sarah in. I was rather hoping, Helen, that you would suggest that the conditions are discharged by officers in consultation with this committee. I think that would have been my preference from the chair. But Sarah, would you like to comment, or Chris, on the efficacy of the proposals that are being put forward?
I'll come back on that, Chair. I think procedurally, what we've got to bear in mind is that the decision that's made this evening will be to grant the application subject to conditions. The applicant, we've got to bear in mind that we are time-bound in terms of the assessment of these applications. The procedure for how we deal with discharge of conditions is completely different to how we normally deal with a planning application. There's no statutory requirement for consultation, and the applicant could quite legitimately say, if we were to present this matter back to committee, that is unlawful because A, it's not within the Constitution, but B, also it goes well out, or sits well outside of statutory provisions in terms of how we should assess this application. I'm not saying that they will do that. I mean, as officers, we will obviously try and engage you as best we can in terms of the information that's submitted to discharge the conditions, but I don't want to present unrealistic expectations to you, because the legislation and the law is clear in terms of how we assess these applications, and our Constitution is clear in that respect also. So to introduce, a new method of assessment of these application types and to change the Constitution is not something I don't think is within the gift of this committee personally. But that's my view on it. As officers, we'll try and keep, if members all want to be, when the details are submitted, quite happy to share those with everyone that sits on this committee, so you can have a look at those details and comment on those details. But there needs to be some certainty in terms of the process, and that decision-making side of it needs to be time-bound also.
Thanks, Chris. Right, let's see if we can get to a resolution. Just remind members that it is our council. We are the members. Right. Do we have a proposal? Do you wish to stick with the current arrangement where the discharge of the relevant conditions is left to officers, or would you like us to, on this occasion only, to make an arrangement that process is in consultation with this committee?
You're looking at me now, aren't you, as a proposer?
I am.
I won't
I know you like.
again,
I know you like
you
responsibility.
keep doing this. Okay, so I can see where the steer is, Chair. But I think equally I can see what Chris is saying as the expert in terms of what would consultation actually look like, and what would it really mean, and what would it really how would it actually help or aid the process. I think that you can tell by the amount of contributions around this table that there's a lot of people in this committee who are really genuinely interested in this process and who want to know. I think the conditions thing often comes up, and I think it would be great from an actual sort of education, professional development point of view for us to find out and have an insight into the how these sort of conditions are checked on and enforced and so on. So I think it's just deciding whether we actually have to. What's consultation going to look like? My worry is that, although I like the idea, my worry is it's going to be very time consuming. We're all going to be, we've been in some quite long planning meetings recently. We're going to be adding more to that workload, more to that sort of that scrutiny that's going to happen at meetings, and it may not be practical to be consulted on all of these things. If we think about the sort of amount of time we have and the resources we have, whether it be practical. I think in an ideal world it'd be great, but I'm not sure we're in that ideal world, and I think therefore I'm probably more inclined to go with Chris's suggestion that we we are informed and given the information about the decisions, and we're able to comment on them, and we're able to ask questions about them. So I think on balance, that's probably what I will go with, because I don't really see it necessarily as being practical to be consulted on every condition, but happy for other people to disagree, of course.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, how about this as a compromise, taking up Chris's point? So just as, for instance, what would the consultation process be like? Let's say condition 4, foul water, information comes back from Severn Trent, hopefully more detail. That goes on the portal. You give us X days to comment. We come back. Would that work?
Yeah, we've got to bear in mind, consistency of approach. We're making a bit of an exception here, aren't we, with this particular site because of the concerns that members have with, flooding events within the Matlock area. So I think the decision is unique, isn't it, to this particular case? I think it's just recognising that, first of all. When the application comes in, what we could do is notify for information all members that sit on the planning committee. That could be part of the decision, this evening, the recorded decision. It makes the decision making very difficult because you're notified for information. We have 8 weeks to determine discharge of conditions applications, so there'll be a period of time in which you can make any comments and raise any concerns with us. If, as a result of consultation with consultees such as Lead Local Flood Authority, Severn Trent Water, where appropriate, if they were to come back and say, we're happy with all this, but yet, a particular member raised specific concern that we didn't feel had been adequately addressed, we could probably seek clarification on those things. But I think it'd have to be through the chair. There needs to be some way of, of working our way through all of that to arrive at a decision, and everyone to know where they fit within that process. So perhaps absolute discretion would sit with the chair in terms of, the decision making and consultation with members. But at the same time, the applicant having made the application, if it results in significant delays in the decision-making process, they're quite entitled to either serve notice on us or to to appeal any no decision that non-determination of the application.
Could we consult chair, inform rest of committee?
We've got so many chairs, haven't we? I don't know which chair would I be chair. I presume it'd be the chair this evening, so Councillor O'Brien. But then Councillor O'Brien takes that role then of distributing and being the mouthpiece for everyone else.
The chair tonight seemed quite keen on being consulted. I wonder if that will be a compromise. I think if you consult the whole committee, I think it's going to get messy and time-consuming and unmanageable. But we'd like all to be informed so we understand the process. But I don't know whether using the chair going through the chairs as a consultee would work as a compromise between the two. I don't know what people think.
Chair, Chris, from what you said before, this will go on the portal anyway these days, yes? So, I mean, if an email, when it goes on the portal, email the members of the planning committee, it's on the portal. You want to say something, say something. I don't see the problem.
I think that as long as that's clear in the decision that's made this evening, there's that clear expectation that will happen. That gives you the opportunity, doesn't it? It's just where there's a dispute. If we, having consulted the statutory consultees, they raise no concerns with what's been presented, but a member has concerns. It's how we deal with that, conflict resolution.
Well, that seems a way forward to me. That I agree that when we say things are on the portal, I mean, that sounds simple and straightforward, but it's a laborious process, and I can assure you, trying to find a particular piece of information, you have to be a bit of a nerd to undertake that. And I do think it's important that, I'm sure they do, but it's important to emphasise again how important this is to members and to the council and to residents. Otherwise, we wouldn't be spending time discussing the issue this evening, and I hope that officers recognise that we're not about making their lives difficult. We're about improving the lives of our residents of Matlock. So I, as chair this evening, would be quite content with all members of this committee being informed of the appearance of the discharge application on the portal, and members who want to raise any issues with that to make them directly to the officers, copied to the chair and vice chair. And I'm sure Sue and David, as my colleagues, will be quite happy to take up if it becomes apparent to us that there are issues associated with any particular discharge which are raised by colleagues. We will certainly undertake to take them up. Does that sound a reasonable way forward? If Chris or Sarah or Helen or Kerry or anybody would like to put that together on a single sheet of A4, please. So then everyone has got absolute clarity as to what process. Is anyone not content with that? Not having a vote. Is anyone? Right, okay, good. Thank you, Robert in particular, for finding a way through that, and Peter. Right, we do have a proposal from Councillor Archer, seconded by Councillor Murphy, to approve the application this evening, subject to the conditions set down in the report. Can we have a show of all those in favour, please? All right, those who are against, and those who wish to abstain. So that is carried. So thank you for that debate, and thank you to our officers for your constructive contribution. Right, our next item on the agenda this evening is item 6. This is the report on the planning appeals. As usual, I'd urge you to look at the decisions, those that have been where we've been successful in resisting the appeal, and the few where the planning inspectorate has reached a different view from the committee and has dismissed the appeal, or sorry, has allowed the appeal. Fortunately, the latter are very, very few, but they do come up from time to time. Would someone like to move receipt of the report, please? Anybody want to second that, please? Councillor Dobbs. So that's proposed by Councillor Lees, seconded by Councillor Dobbs. Would anyone like to ask any questions? No. All those in favour, please show. Anybody against? Anyone wish to abstain? No, that's carried unanimously. Right, thank you, colleagues, for the debate this evening. That was a relatively short meeting. So have a safe